J. Banyan. Mandarins for Mandarin. Whatever happened to Singapore's real mother tongue?
Whatever happened to Singapore's mother tongues?
When Sandy, a young Chinese Singaporean,
When Sandy, a young Chinese Singaporean,
learned that her grandmother was terminally ill, she signed up for a workshop in the Hokkien language.
She signed up for a workshop in the Hokkien language,
run by LearnDialect.sg,
run by LearnDialect.sg,
a charity founded to help Singaporeans communicate with the city-state's older Chinese residents.
A charity founded to help Singaporeans communicate with the city-state's older citizens, older residents,
including within their own families.
Sandy, a Chinese Singaporean, a young Chinese Singaporean, found that her grandmother was terminally ill. She signed up for a workshop in the Hokkien language, run by LearnDialect.sg, a charity founded to help Singaporeans communicate with the city-state's older residents, including within their own families.
Sandy is fluent in English and Mandarin.
Sandy is fluent in English and Mandarin,
the official mother tongue of Chinese Singaporeans.
Sandy is fluent in English and Mandarin, the official mother tongue of Chinese Singaporeans.
Her grandmother spoke little of either. Before she died, Sandy thrilled her by asking in Hokkien, "What was your childhood like?"
Before she died, Sandy thrilled her by asking in Hokkien, "What was your childhood like?"
She was even able to understand some of the answer.
She was even able to understand some of the answers.
Their language barrier was the product of decades of linguistic engineering.
The language barrier was the product of decades of linguistic engineering.
English has been the language of instruction in nearly all schools since 1987.
English has been the instruction of the language. It has been the language of instruction in nearly all classes, all schools since 1987.
To reinforce Singapore's global competitive edge.
English has been the language of instruction in nearly all schools since 1987 to reinforce Singapore's global competitive edge.
But depending on ethnicity, people study a second language. Typically Mandarin, Malay, or Tamil.
But depending on ethnicity, pupils study a second language, typically Mandarin, Malay, and Tamil.
These are intended, as Lisa Lim of the University of Sydney puts it,
as Lisa Lim of the University of Sydney puts it,
to add cultural ballast vis-a-vis English. These
are intended, as Lisa Lim of the University of Sydney puts it, to add the cultural ballast vis-a-vis English.
In the case of Mandarin, its acquisition has been reinforced by the government's annual Speak Mandarin campaign.
Its acquisition has been reinforced by the government's annual Speak Mandarin campaign. Started
in 1979.
In the case of Mandarin, its acquisition has been reinforced by the government's annual Speak Mandarin campaign, started in 1979.
Mandarin is a standardized version of the language.
Mandarin is the standardized version of the language
spoken by the people of the vast plains of northern China.
Mandarin is a standardized version of the language spoken by the people of the vast plains of northern China.
Yet hardly any of the Chinese from whom Singaporeans are descended
Yet hardly any of the Chinese from whom Singaporeans are descended
hailed from there.
hailed from there. Yet hardly any of the Chinese from which Singaporeans are descended hailed from there.
They came instead from the southern provinces of Fujian. They came instead from the southern province.
They came instead from the southern provinces
of Fujian,
Fujian,
Guangdong,
Guangdong,
and Hainan,
Hainan,
and so spoke different languages.
so spoke different languages.
Hokkien, Cantonese, and Hakka,
Hokkien, Cantonese, and Hakka,
along with two Hokkien-related tongues, Chu Chao and Hainanese.
Chu Chao, and along with the two Hokkien-related tongues, Chu Chao and Hainanese. They came instead from the southern province of Fujian, Guangdong, and Hainan. So spoke different languages, Hokkien, Cantonese, and Hakka, along with the two Hokkien-related tongues, Chu Chu, Hangyexiang, Hongsa-Ka-Shen, Songkara-Panka.
The Speak Mandarin campaign
The Speak Mandarin campaign
sought to destroy Chinese Singaporeans' real mother tongues.
to destroy Chinese Singaporeans' real mother tongue.
First, by demeaning them as provincial dialects of Mandarin,
First, by demeaning them as provincial dialects of Mandarin,
when they are in fact mutually unintelligible languages,
when they are in fact mutually unintelligible languages,
as different as English, German, and Danish.
as different as English, German, and Danish. The Speak Mandarin campaign sought to destroy Chinese Singaporeans' real mother tongues, first by demeaning them as provincial dialects of Mandarin, when they are in fact mutually unintelligible languages, as different as English, German, and Danish. Okay?
Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding father,
Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding father,
who started learning Chinese in his 30s,
who started learning Chinese in his 30s,
promoted the now discredited notion
promoted the now discredited notion
that humans have a tightly limited capacity for language.
that humans have a tightly limited capacity for language.
Hokkien and all the rest undermine the official bilingualism
Hokkien and all the rest undermine the official bilingualism
by hogging chunks of children's memories.
by hogging chunks of the children's memories. Oh. Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's founding father, who started learning Chinese in his 30s, promoted the now discredited notion that humans have a tightly limited capacity for language. Hokkien and all the rest undermine the official bilingualism by hogging chunks of the children's memories.
Further, the great Tidier disliked the diversity embodied in these languages.
Further, the great idea disliked the diversity embodied in these languages
and wanted to forge a single Chinese identity. Reason enough to foist on Chinese Singaporeans an alien language.
Reason enough to foist on Chinese Singaporeans as an alien language. Further, the great idea disliked the diversity embodied in these languages and wanted to forge a single Chinese identity. Reason enough to foist on Chinese Singaporeans an alien language.
Lee also thought that China's opening promised riches to those who could speak its official language.
Lee also thought China's opening promised riches to those who could speak its official language.
So dialects were disparaged.
So dialects were disparaged.
In the early 1980s,
In the early 1980s,
television and radio programming in these languages all but disappeared.
Television, television, and radio programming in this language all but disappeared,
cutting many people adrift.
Cutting many people adrift. In the early 1980s, television and radio programming in this language all but disappeared, cutting many people adrift.
To speak dialect with your child, the government warned,
To speak dialect with your child, the government warned,
to ruin his future.
Is to ruin their future, ruin his future. To speak dialect with your child, the government warned, is to ruin his future.
By the campaign's own yardsticks, the success is striking.
By the campaign's own yardstick, the success is striking. By the campaign's own yardstick, the success is striking.
The use of Chinese vernaculars at home has
Chinese vernaculars at home
collapsed from 76% of Chinese households in 1980.
From 76% of Chinese households in 1980
to 16% in 2015.
To 16% in 2015. The use of Chinese vernaculars at home has collapsed from 76% of Chinese households in 1980 to 16% in 2015.
Over the same period,
the
use of Mandarin rose from 13% of Chinese households to 46%.
From 13% of Chinese household to 46% of the same period, the use of Mandarin rose from 13% of Chinese household to 46%.
But the linguistic engineering has had an unintended consequence. The use of English is now increasing faster. Especially among younger families.
But the linguistic engineering has had an unintended consequence. The use of English is increasing faster, especially among younger families.
Over 70% of households with children at primary school
use it as their main language. Undermining
Mandarin and vernaculars.
Over 70% of the households with children at primary school use it as their main language, undermining Mandarin and vernacular.
And so a debate about the costs of language policies has.
A debate about the cost of language policies has grown
since Lee's death in 2015.
A debate about the cost of language policies has grown since Lee's death in 2015.
The same year, the 50th anniversary of the nation's founding.
The 50th anniversary of the nation's founding
was accompanied by an outpouring of sentimentality over Singapore's roots.
Was accompanied by an outpouring of sentimentality over Singapore's roots. The same year, the 50th anniversary of Singapore's founding was accompanied by an outpouring of sentimentality over Singapore's roots.
These days, officials are a bit readier to tolerate Singapore's linguistic variety.
These days, officials are a bit readier to tolerate Singapore's linguistic diversity.
Lee Kuan Yew once called Singlish the country's vibrant mashup of English, Malay, and Chinese vernaculars.
Lee Kuan Yew once called Singlish the country's vibrant mash-up of English, Malay, and Chinese vernaculars.
A
handicap. Lee Kuan Yew once called Singlish the vibrant mashup of Chinese, English, Malay, and Chinese vernaculars. A handicap.
Lee's son, the Prime Minister, Lee Hsien Loong, claims to be proud of Singapore's unique form of Mandarin.
Lee Lee's son, the prime minister. 졸려 씨.
For instance, the Malay for market, pasar, has been imported as bashar.
For instance, the Malay for market pasa has been imported as basha. Pasha, but
That would be unintelligible to a mainland Chinese.
that would be unintelligible to mainland Chinese.
Yet that only highlights a paradox Mr. Lee does not acknowledge.
Yet that only highlights a paradox that Mr. Lee does not acknowledge.
On the one hand, he praises Singaporean Mandarin.
On the one hand, he praises Singaporean Mandarin
Because it supposedly reinforces a Chinese Singaporean identity.
because it supposedly reinforces a Chinese Singaporean identity. On the one hand, he praises Singaporean Mandarin because it supposedly reinforces a Chinese Singaporean identity.
On the other, he frets about others stealing a march in China because of their more fluent Mandarin.
On the other, he frets about others stealing a march in China who speak because of their more fluent Mandarin. Okay? I see. 오케이. 산만해? 졸려? 졸려 죽겠어, 그치? 졸려?
난 안 들린데?
죽을래? 아버지한테 반말하고?
누나들 너무 졸릴 것 같아.
On the one hand, on the other hand, 논리를 좀 보시.
드디어 오늘 걸 해볼까?
좀 자.
Meanwhile, younger Singaporeans are embracing former mother tongues.
Meanwhile, younger Singaporeans embracing former mother tongues.
Ski Yo and Eugene Lee were
스키요. 여기요가 아니고 스키요.
motivated to found LearnDialect.sg.
Were motivated to find young dialect, learn dialect SG.
Upon seeing an elderly Cantonese speaker in a nursing home.
Upon seeing an elderly Cantonese speaker in a nursing home,
Struggled to communicate that she was cold.
struggled to communicate that she was cold. 스키요 and 여기요, 저기요 were motivated to found learndialect.sg upon seeing an elderly Cantonese speaker in a nursing home struggled to communicate that she was cold.
Health workers have signed up to their courses.
Health workers have signed to their courses,
while others want to say the right things at family gatherings over the Lunar New Year.
while others want to say the right thing at family gatherings of the Lunar New Year. Health workers have signed to their courses, while others want to say the right thing at family gatherings of the Lunar New Year.
There is an uptick in Hokkien television programming,
There is an uptick in Hokkien television programming,
and everyone admits that effete Mandarin is useless for swearing.
and everyone admits effete Mandarin is useless for swearing.